and to analyze the rhetorical choices. So let's practice a little bit. I have just a prompt here from a passage from a past essay. I want you guys to take a look at this prompt and try to identify the 5 elements of the rhetorical situation. So give this a pause, take as much time as you need, unpause whenever you're done. Try to find these 5 just from this prompt here. And actually, this is the prompt, yeah. So just from the prompt, try to find some information that can help understand the rhetorical situation. So hopefully you're done if you've unpaused. Here are the answers. The writer is Claire Booth Luce, an American journalist and politician. That information is given to us right here. The purpose is to prepare the audience before criticizing something. Now, it says here she went on to criticize the tendency of the American press. So you have to be careful, right? Because you might say, okay, that's the purpose of her speech. The purpose of her speech is to criticize. And that is true. However, we're not reading the entire speech. We are reading the introduction of the speech, and it tells us that she uses this introduction to prepare the audience for her message. So the purpose of this particular part of the speech that we're reading is to prepare, even though the overall purpose of the entire speech, which we're not reading, is to criticize. So that's a little bit tricky. The audience here, well, it tells us what the audience is. The audience are other journalists at the Women's National Press Club, right? She gave this speech to journalists at the Women's National Press Club. The message is that she disagrees with the tendency of the American press to sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of the perceived public demand for sensationalist stories. And that's just taken word for word here from, she went on to criticize the tendency of the American press to sacrifice, it's like word for word. But that's her message, right? Her message is that she disagrees with it. She doesn't like it. And as far as context is just pretty much anything else that's going on at this time. So we know that the year is 1960. That's some context. And some other context is that this is the opening of her speech. This is the introduction of her speech. And we know that the whole speech is much longer. So that's also some context that can help us understand what's going on. So hopefully you guys can see it's not super complicated to identify these elements of the rhetorical situation. In this one, all 5 were right from the prompt. Most of the time, I would say you can get all 5 from the prompt. Sometimes you can only get a couple of them. But now that we have this information, this tells us a lot about how the author may choose to kind of go about, not the writing, but the speaking of the speech, right? The fact that she's talking to other journalists tells us that, she may relate to them or try to relate to them. The fact that we know that her purpose is to prepare the audience before criticizing tells us that, okay, she may make some choices that will help her kind of ease them a little bit and kind of establish that, she's not an enemy before she goes on to tear them down a little bit. All of this information is helpful to us. So now I've kind of given some hints already. Now what I want you guys to do, now that we have each of those 5 components of the rhetorical situation, I want you to actually read this passage and see if you can identify ways that each of these components influences the text. I don't necessarily know if what I said is actually going to be in here. Those were just kind of guesses. I haven't read this passage in a while. But go ahead, give it a read. Take as much time as you need, as always, and see if you can find ways that the rhetorical situation influences the text. Okay. Here are some examples. These are not the only correct answers. If you had different answers, that doesn't mean you're wrong, but here are some examples here. Okay, let me see if I can make this. That's better, sort of. There we go. All right. So one way that the writer might influence the text, or does influence the text, not might, does, She's a journalist herself, right? And as a journalist, she has personal firsthand experience with the topic she's talking about, and she is also part of the audience that she's addressing. And she uses her firsthand experience to kind of reinforce what she says. For the purpose, her purpose being to prepare them, it influences the text because she starts with praise and by relating to the audience, and she establishes that she is not an enemy before she goes on to criticize. And she goes, I think, in kind of the first 2 paragraphs, or actually throughout this whole thing, honestly, she's kind of letting the audience know, I am not against you here, right? And you guys have a hard job. I know you have a difficult job, blah, blah, blah. As far as the audience, she specifically addresses the audience. She says, where is it? You have asked me to tell you what's wrong with you, right? She tailors to their knowledge, experiences, and traits, right? She knows that her audience is other journalists. So she goes on, but you are an audience of journalists, right? She goes on to kind of talk about things that she knows that they will relate to or things that will resonate with them, right? No audience knows better than an audience of journalists that the pursuit of the truth and the articulation of it is the most delicate, hazardous, exciting, and inexact of tasks, right? She says, you know this thing, you know these things because you are journalists also, right? And she knows that they know that this will resonate with them because they are journalists. Her message being that she disagrees with the tendency to sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of public demand for sensationalist stories, she says. Or rather, she introduces her general thoughts about the positives of the press to set up her main message. So because her message is going to be something negative, she kind of starts with positive things about the press that she likes. And then context, she makes references to Billy Graham's and Bishop Sheen's, which would have been effective in the 1960s, right? So that's one way that the context here matters. In the 1960s, these would have been references that the audience would have understood because that's when this speech was given. So your examples could have been different. The things you identified could have been different, but hopefully this kind of demonstrates the ways that the rhetorical situation matters, right? The ways that rhetorical situation can help us understand what's going on in the text as well. And again, right, we are not going to write about these things in the essay, but they are going to help us with the things that we do write about, which are rhetorical choices. And understanding rhetorical situations can also help us with our own writing, right? When we're writing our essay, we can think, okay, what is my audience, right? How can I make something that my audience is going to resonate with, or that is going to resonate with my audience? What is my purpose? What choices can I make to further my own purpose? If we think about the rhetorical situation for our own writing, we can also make stronger rhetorical choices. So now let's talk about rhetorical choices. That's what we're analyzing, right? Rhetorical choices are what the rhetorical analysis essay wants us to talk about. We have to identify them, and then we have to talk about why they're there and what they do for the writing. And rhetorical choices can essentially be any decision that an author makes in his or her writing. We're going to talk about a couple different examples of different types of rhetorical choices. I want to make it very clear right now, the examples that we talk about and the types of rhetorical choices that we're going to talk about are not the only ones that you can write about. You can write about any element of a text that an author employs to convey a particular meaning, emotion, or effect. Anything that an author does can be a rhetorical choice if you can prove that it does something for the writing, either that it reinforces a certain idea or it has some sort of effect. As long as you can analyze the effect of it, you can write about it. Some things that we will talk about, though, that can be that are kind of very common for students to write about, to identify and write about in this essay: diction and syntax, rhetorical appeals, paragraph structure, rhetorical devices, rhetorical strategies, and we'll talk about what those mean and what the differences are in a second. But yeah, any decision a writer makes can be a rhetorical choice and can be something that you can analyze in your essay. All right, let's talk about rhetorical devices. A rhetorical device is something that you should probably be familiar with, especially if you have taken AP English language all the way up until this point in the year, starting in August or September. A rhetorical device is a technique that can be used to convey meaning and persuade a reader by using language that is designed to evoke an emotion. There are a lot of different rhetorical devices. I am sure you guys are familiar with a lot of these that are on the screen right now. The ones that are on the screen right now are not the only ones. There are a lot more. You don't need to know all of them. You don't need to memorize all of them. These are kind of the more common ones, the ones that I put up here. They're ones that you will frequently see in passages for the rhetorical analysis essay. If you want to, I'm not going to read all these out. If you want to kind of review all of these, feel free to pause the video and look through these. If you want to expand your knowledge of rhetorical devices, you can just hop on Google, type in list of rhetorical devices, right? And it'll give you a whole bunch to look at. You can write about any of these that are on here. You can write about any other rhetorical devices you know that are not on here. Or you could write about no rhetorical devices at all and write about different rhetorical choices. All totally fine. But yeah, these are rhetorical devices, right? Things like imagery, hyperbole, simile, metaphor, stuff like that. So let's identify some. Let's practice finding rhetorical devices in a passage. Pause this, read through again, and pay attention specifically for rhetorical devices, either these rhetorical devices or any other rhetorical devices. The little question prompt thing that I wrote over here says identify two and explain their effect. If you can identify more, right? Identify as many as you can. Find as many as you can. And then after you've found as many as you can find, for two of them, pick two of them and explain their effect. Explain why the author uses them, right? Why is the writer including this rhetorical device? What does this rhetorical device achieve versus if the author didn't use it? Go ahead, pause this, and when you're done, unpause, and I'll give you some examples that I found. All right, this is what I got. There's a bunch here. I hope it all fits. Not really. I'm going to have to make this text a little bit smaller to get it to fit on here. How's that? Nope, still. All right, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with like half of it. And then I'll throw the other half on here after we do this half. Okay. So here are some that I found. In lines 5 to 10, I stand here at this rostrum. I don't know what that word means. Invited to throw rocks at you. The subject not only is of great national significance, but also has, one should say, infinite possibilities and infinite perils to the rock thrower. So this is a metaphor, right? The metaphor here is this metaphor about throwing rocks and being a rock thrower. She is not literally throwing rocks at anyone, but she is using that as a metaphor to compare herself to a rock thrower, to demonstrate the idea that she's going to say something that may hurt the audience, and that the audience may respond to her in a negative way, as they would if someone were throwing rocks at them. Right? She's not throwing literal rocks at them, but she is going to say things that they may take offense to, that may hurt them. That's why she is comparing herself to a rock thrower. Another one, I found a rhetorical question on line 26. For what is good journalism all about? And the purpose of this rhetorical question is that it introduces this idea of good journalism and provides a segue for the author to provide her definition of good journalism. And she does that, right? On a working, finite level, it is the effort to achieve illuminating candor in print and to strip away cant. So yeah, she's not looking for, it's a rhetorical question because she's not looking for an answer to this question. She is using it to introduce an idea. So those were two. Let me now copy and paste. I have, I think, 3 more that I found. Repetition. Let me erase these lines here. Repetition, lines 27 to 40. It is the effort. She repeats that a whole bunch from here all the way through here, the end of the paragraph. It is the effort to do this, not only in matters of state, diplomacy, and politics, blah, 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 blah. It is the effort to explain everything. It is the effort, to describe the lives of men. It is, to use the big word, the pursuit and the effort of to state the truth. And she repeats this over and over again. She starts all of her sentences with, it is the effort, to emphasize the many qualities that make up good journalism, right? Because that's what she's talking about in this paragraph. She's talking about what is good journalism all about. And then good journalism is the effort to do this, it's the effort to do that, right? The repetition emphasizes all of these qualities. There's more repetition, happy and challenged in lines 1 to 5. I am happy and flattered to be a guest of honor on this always exciting and challenging occasion. Both and we were the audience tonight. I am less happy than you might think and more challenged than you could know. It's not as much repetition as it is the effort repetition, but there is still repetition here, right? She uses these same words over and over, or not over and over again, but she uses the same words twice. And they kind of have reverse meanings in a way. It emphasizes how she's feeling, and she's kind of comparing the way that she is feeling versus the way that she would have felt under different circumstances, right? She is happy, but less happy than you might think, and it's a challenging occasion, but it's more challenging than you could know, right? Because of the fact that she has to criticize them. And then some more repetition. You have asked me in line 6, even at their invitation in line 13, and you asked for it in line 25. These are not word for word repetitions like it is the effort, but it's repeating the same idea. You have asked me, even at their invitation, you asked for it. All of these are conveying the idea that the audience is asking her to do what she's doing, right? She's using this repetition. She's frequently reminding the audience that they asked for this in order to shield herself from backlash. So those are the 5 that I found. If you found more, that's awesome. That's great. If you found different ones, also great. If you found less, that's fine. But hopefully you were able to find at least 2. Maybe 3 would be, 2 or 3 would be a solid amount. And hopefully also you were able to see what each of them were doing, right? Because every rhetorical device has a purpose or effect. Every rhetorical device is there for a reason. No one's just going to throw a metaphor or throw some symbolism in there just because, right? They're trying to achieve something when they do it. So identifying it is half the battle. Figuring out what it's doing is the other half of the battle. Now, rhetorical strategies. These are another type of rhetorical choice that you can use. Oh, by the way, one final note with rhetorical devices. You can use any of these devices in your writing as well, or any other rhetorical devices in your writing as well. And that's one way that can help you with the sophistication point. Using rhetorical devices in your own writing effectively and correctly will make your writing more sophisticated. Rhetorical strategies are another type of rhetorical choice. And rhetorical strategies are kind of bigger methods of presenting information in a text. There are, how many are there? 7 different rhetorical strategies. And these I will kind of talk about. I didn't talk about the different rhetorical devices on this list because you should know them already. These rhetorical strategies I think you're maybe less likely to know about, so I will kind of talk about each of these. Cause and effect is one. It's a little bit straightforward, right? It's used to demonstrate a cause and effect relationship between 2 different things. If a writer is trying to explain the harmful effects of global warming, for example, they may use cause and effect to demonstrate how global warming can cause the polar ice caps to melt. It's presenting information by saying that, by demonstrating, by showing that one thing causes another thing to happen. Compare and contrast. It's used to demonstrate similarities and differences between 2 things, or the pros and cons of different ideas. Classification and division. Now we're getting into territory that might be a little bit more uncommon, right? Cause and effect and compare and contrast are definitely things you have experience with. I feel pretty confident saying that. Classification and division, maybe not. But the idea with classification and division is organizing ideas by putting them into groups, that would be classification, or breaking them into smaller pieces, that would be division. And the point of this would be to make complicated topics easier to understand. If you kind of lump some things together or break them apart into smaller pieces. Definition. You use definition to inform a reader of what a term means, but also what it doesn't mean. And the purpose of definition is to make sure that the reader understands what your intention is when you're using a certain term. Just so there's no confusion, right? And it can also create emphasis as well. I was about to use an example from the previous passage, but I'm not going to do that because that's actually in the next practice. But if you use a term and then you say, this term means this, right? And it doesn't mean this, or it doesn't apply to this. Just letting your audience know what the term means, but not just like literally what the dictionary says about that word, what your use of that word means, can help achieve this effect. Description. You use imagery, vivid language to give a mental picture of what's going on. Appeal to the senses, that sort of thing. Show rather than tell. Narration is used to tell a story. It's frequently used when talking about things that happened in the past. It could be something that happened to you or something that happened not to you, right? But it involves telling a story about what happened. Or even it could be about something that will happen in the future if you're kind of telling a story. And then process explanation, explaining how something was done or how something is done. Recipes, for example, use process explanation. First do this, now do that, sort of. Or like manuals to things, right? Anything that's explaining how to do something, that's process explanation. These are your rhetorical strategies. I think technically there are one or two more, but these are the ones that are really relevant. The other ones aren't really relevant to what you're doing with the rhetorical analysis essay. These are different rhetorical strategies that you might find in passages that you have to read, and then if you do find them, you can write about them as your rhetorical choice.